Ethan reels from Skink and Exeter's news, that of Bron's survival and his impending nuptials with Elena. We open issue 35 with him shocked and stunned, literally shouting, "What?" Ashley is taken aback as well. That's impossible. Bron is dead. Exeter reports that news of his return came shortly after our heroes left for Tigris. The wedding news is much more recent, Skink adds, saying that the wedding is to be held at the Raven Palace. That's ridiculous, Ethan says. There is no way that their father would let Elena marry the man who murdered Artor. It's in the name of bringing peace to the two nations, Skink adds, so the stakes couldn't be higher. But Ethan won't accept that. There must be something more going on here. Their father wouldn't do this. Elena wouldn't agree to it. They have to do something. Ashley tries to reel him in, cautioning that they don't know enough to act right now. Ethan won't be stopped, though. If they leave now, they might just make it in time to stop the ceremony. Is she with him? Ashley shakes her head. She still has a price on it. If she is caught in the Ravenlands, there is a good chance that she's not leaving them again. Ethan reluctantly agrees. He might be in a similar position, but he also would have a much easier time traveling, escaping, and fighting if he was on his own. Skink, however, volunteers for this trip, and Ethan is down to have him along. Exeter then asks what this bad news from Tigris is all about. Are they going to side with the Sanctuary Isle? Ethan rubs the bridge of his nose. Oh, flooping A, that's right. No, he sighs, they won't help. In fact, they want to conquer the Sanctuary Isle and then move on to the two kingdoms, but one disaster at a time, okay? They will deal with Tigris when they have to. Right now, his main concern is his sister. Have things on the island been okay, Exeter? The big man confirms that they are, and so Ethan prepares to leave once again. He has to do this. He and Ashley kiss, and then he looks to Skink. Looks like it's just you and me again. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 18.20 of Scion, The Wedding Crasher. These opening pages of Scion issue 35 are your classic-style Ron Marz recap. He has covered Ethan and Ashley's recent trip to Tigris, the return of Bron to both life and the throne, as well as his impending marriage to Elena. At this point in our reading, I have already been skipping the story thus far page that CrossGen provides on the inside cover, because Ron Marz works a recap into pretty much every issue anyways, and I have to admit, he does it pretty well. This scene feels very natural for the cast, they all sound like they're in character, their concerns seem very natural, it flows well, and overall it makes sense. Perhaps the only thing that really bothers me here is Ashley ducking out of this wedding adventure. She clearly has supporters in the Raven Nation, as shown previously in the comic. After all, she helped sneak Ethan out of the Raven Keep back in issue 2/3, and we met Rudd, the blacksmith with an escape tunnel, in issue 13. It's not like her or Ethan had any trouble traveling the Ravenlands before as well. We have seen Ethan practically crisscross the Ravenlands without anyone spotting him or catching him, save for Exeter, who is now on his side, so he kind of doesn't count. I am pretty confident that the Raven people are just dumb and that they don't know what wanted criminals look like. Plus, Marz has gone out of his way to show an emotional connection between Ashley and Elena before. And finally, he made it a point to reestablish that Ashley is brave, that she is a fighter, and that she is unafraid to risk her life, both against the pirates who were storming the Sanctuary Isle, and when she risked her life to escape in Tigris. But here, at this wedding thing, she balks. I would guess that Marz keeps her out of the story in order to slim things down from a narrative perspective, which would allow him to focus more on the extended cast of royal characters that we're going to be running into. Obviously, Elena, Kai, Prince Court, and Bron are going to be a big part of the wedding portion of this upcoming story. And Skink hasn't been an actual character in probably like 24 issues, so him tagging along doesn't really add anything to the story. He is more of a prop than anything, so him taking Ashley's spot is pretty inconsequential to me. I do think that it would have made more sense if Marz had had Ashley stay behind in order to prepare defenses against Tigris. He even starts to switch our narrative gears at the very end of this conversation, bringing up Tigress and their impending threat, so why not just have Ashley stay to deal with that while Ethan goes on this personal quest, huh? This issue does feature the return of penciler Jim Chueng, inker Don Hillsman II, and colorist Jason Keith. And thank you, God! Right off the bat, we get a gorgeous 2-page spread of Ethan and Ashley arriving at the docks to meet their fellows. The characters look great, the panels flow well, the colors are bright and dynamic. Flooping A, this book is pretty, and I love when it's pretty. I do want to give a special acknowledgement to letterer Troy Patiri. The opening single page of this issue is actually a wedding invitation with a gorgeous scrawling script upon it. The lettering doesn't quite match up with the inking on the rest of the image. The lettering is clearly a digital effect on top of traditional pencils and inks, but it does look appropriately fancy, and it immediately sets the tone for the wedding. We then move on from the Sanctuary Isle, jumping to the Raven Keep. We're actually going to be bouncing around the Raven Keep pretty quickly here as we move through 3 2-page scenes. First up is Queen Mariella visiting her daughter, Princess Elena, before she preps for the wedding to give her a golden choker that has been passed down in her family. Second, we visit King Bron and his brother Court, who do their political doublespeak where one of them insults the other without outright insulting anyone, and then the other one threatens to kill them, but then they kind of can't because it would be obvious. And finally, we end on a scene where King Dane checks in with Prince Kai, basically telling him to behave and keep his mouth shut during the ceremony. If you're wondering why I'm not going into very great detail with these scenes, it's because they don't do anything new. Elena's scene is meant to convey that she isn't thrilled with this marriage, but that she's going to go through with it anyways. The choker that her mother gives her is a visual metaphor for the discomfort of an arranged marriage. When Elena puts it on, she comments that it's a bit tight, and Mariella actually agrees, but she'll get used to it in time. This isn't a bad scene, and it kind of hints that Mariella might not have been in love with King Dane when they got married. It might also have been a marriage of political convenience, but that she grew into it, and Elena might do the same with Bron. We haven't gotten a lot of information about Dane or Mariella's personal lives, or what their lives were like before the beginning of this comic book, and I am definitely inferring in this conversation, but that is something that I think is at least interesting, and it's kind of new information. It's the closest we get to anything new out of these 3 scenes. The Bron and Court scene then echoes the scene between the brothers back in issue 31, when Bron retook the throne. Court does a lot of small personal digs at his brother, and Bron basically tells Court that he is willing to kill anyone who crosses him, even if they are helpful servants, like the lesser racist man Nock, who was killed back in issue 8, or if they're family, like his father. So Court wants Bron gone, but Bron can't be stopped, so again, nothing new is presented here. And then the scene with Dane and Kai just reruns their now standing argument from the past few issues. Kai doesn't understand how Dane could do this to their family. Dane says, STFU kid, or you'll get the back of my hand again, and we're done. And I am very torn on these 3 scenes. On the positive side, they are consistent with all of the characters involved. They're pretty fast-paced. Like I said, I think the longest of these scenes is maybe 3 pages, and they do a great job of either establishing how everyone feels if you're a new reader, or reminding you of how everyone feels if you are a long-time reader. The writing is well done, and they are all well rendered, of course. They look good. If you enjoyed the subtle threats between Bron and Court back in issue 31 like I did, their scene has that exact same kind of feel, and I super praised that issue for nailing the tone of that moment. On the negative side, though, if you include the first scene on the Sanctuary Isle, which was also a recap, we are now 9 pages into this 22-page comic book, meaning that we're almost halfway through the issue, and we have been presented with nothing new. Just recap, 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 recap. And remember, we had a recap on the Story Thus Far page, so if you read everything that was presented to you in this issue, then you have gotten 2 recaps of the past 6 issues now. And that bugs the ever-loving crap out of me. CrossGen's comics cost $3 an issue, and sure, that is not a lot on its own, but when you are buying the entire CrossGen line at the time, you are buying 12 plus comic books. And then maybe you're buying some Marvel books on the side, or maybe you're buying some DC or Image books or whatever. My point is that when I have a limited budget and I'm going into a comic book store, I don't want to spend $3 on a flooping recap episode. Does that make this a bad comic, though? I don't know. I don't feel like I can say that. Everything was well written, all of the characters were on point, all of the artwork looks great. I would argue that this issue feels bad for me, but for a new reader, maybe it is exactly what they need. Anyways, moving forward. I mentioned earlier that Ashley was allies with a blacksmith named Rudd, whose secret tunnel allowed Ethan and Ashley to escape their fight with Bron back in issue 13. Well, Ethan pops up from Rudd's floor again, apologizing for interrupting his work. Rudd is more than happy to help, especially after Ethan helped found the Sanctuary Isle. He asks after Ashley, but she isn't here for this run. In fact, he asks, why is Ethan here? Ethan then explains about the wedding and asks if Skink can stay here while he goes and crashes this thing. Rudd says that's fine, but then he points to a nearby TV. Ethan better hurry, because the marriage is happening now. The weather for the wedding is beautiful. It is probably the brightest, sunniest day that I have ever seen in the Ravenlands. White birds fly outside the church as two small children escort Princess Elena and King Dane into the building, scattering flower petals. Two women follow behind, bouquets held in their hands. Elena pauses, closing her eyes and taking a steadying breath. Dane, stopping, looks at her. Are you ready? She opens her eyes, determined. She's ready. We move into a 2-page spread of Elena approaching the back of the church with large arch windows and plenty of natural light flowing in. On the left side of the church is the heron representation, and on the right, the ravens. Bron smiles through his one good eye at his approaching bride. Prince Kai scowls, his hand shaking into a fist. Queen Mariella rests a calming hand on it. You can't stop this, she whispers. Then who will? He asks. As Dane and Elena approach Bron, the glare that she has on her face is fantastic. Dane starts to say something, but Elena just stops him. There is nothing more to be said at this point, is there? Dane nods. He supposes not. He then passes her hand to Bron, formally saying that he gives Bron his daughter. Care for her as he would. Bron compliments Elena as Dane takes his seat, next to a scowling Prince Kai. Once he has, our future couple kneels, perpendicular to the priest but facing each other, and the priest starts his big wedding speech. We then move from the church to the capital city, where the wedding continues to be broadcast to the populace. A few townspeople comment on Elena's beauty, jealous of King Bron tonight. This is overheard by a cloaked Ethan, who works his way towards the Raven Keep. The speech then continues to be cut as Ethan works his way closer, ending up having to fight off a handful of guards. He does well, but let's face it, Ethan is also in the heart of the Raven power structure. More and more soldiers join the fight, piling onto Ethan, overwhelming him with sheer numbers. Bron slips a ring on Elena's finger, promising his devotion to her. As Ethan struggles, Elena puts a ring on Bron's finger. Will she take him to be her husband? The priest asks. A single tear runs down her cheek, and Elena says that she will. King Dane smiles, and suddenly the door to the church is blown off its hinges. His tattered brown cloak flapping in the wind, his energy sword glowing yellow, Ethan says to stop the ceremony! Everyone is surprised by this, but Bron turns to the priest. Continue. Ethan starts to march into the church, but he is blocked by the one person that he would not fight, his father. As Ethan's father and king, and I'm not sure if you being his king still applies, Daddy-O, he's running his own island nation now, he commands Ethan to stop. Why? Ethan demands. How can you allow this? And while Ethan is distracted, Bron promises to take Elena as his wife. Very well, the priest says. Then let no man split asunder this union, which needs to be sealed with a kiss. Quote, now and forevermore, King Bron and Queen Elena are husband and wife, end quote. When the couple kisses, Bron's face is half turned, smiling like a fox at Ethan. Floopid creep. Oh, what a smarmy jerk. Oh, what a gross victory for Bron. This ending is an interesting move by Mars. In your traditional story of heroic fantasy, the hero would charge into the wedding and he would either stop it or he would get into a big climactic fight scene with the dastardly villain and in turn stop it. In fact, I immediately flashed to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves when Bron told the priest to continue. I love that movie. Obviously, Ethan isn't going to kiss and marry his sister in this comic book, but the vibe is still the same. We still have a princess who is in danger, a villain trying to claim her, and our heroic prince is on the way to save the day. But he fails. Ethan rushed here, he fought valiantly, he did everything that he could, he's just too late. This really highlights the writing fun that Ron Marz has with this book. Ethan is a superpowered young man, and he has pretty much handled every physical threat that has been thrown at him up to this point. But Mars has also long established that Ethan struggles with more intellectual challenges, like managing the Sanctuary Isle, or healing the emotional rift in his family, or stopping this wedding. That's particularly interesting to me because Bron acts like he is mostly a physical threat, but honestly, he has been more successful doing these kind of intellectual attacks, like the murder of his father, managing to blame that murder on Ashley, and now setting up this wedding. He is much more cunning than he is a skilled fighter, which is fascinating because Bron presents himself as a fighter. In contrast, Ethan is far more the intellectual. He cares for the people around him, he questions the morality of his judgment and decisions, but he's been way more successful as a warrior than as a thinker. Also, you can apparently get from the Sanctuary Isle to the Raven Keep in one day on foot. Like, that's crazy to me. I am a bit confused by Mars had Skink join Ethan on this quest, only to be left at Rudd's. That just seems pointless. He doesn't even show up here. Why is this guy even going to be on the adventure? I don't know. Issue 36 opens with the priest reaffirming that last issue's ending was no hoax, dream sequence, or fake out. With arms raised, he pronounces, "King Bron and Queen Elena." The king smiles, pleased with how this has worked out. The queen remains quietly stoic. Ethan, on the other hand, is distraught. He can't believe that this is really happening. He won't let it happen. Ethan steps forward, challenging Bron to a fight. Bron didn't think that he would have the chance to do this so soon, but hey, what better wedding gift than your head? He summons his red energy sword and Ethan rushes in, but Elena steps between them. This is her wedding day, and she won't see it ruined with bloodshed. She tells Ethan to lay down his sword and demands that her husband do the same. Bron lowers his hands. Of course, wife. He then tells his guards to stand down as well. After all, they're all family now, aren't they? He offers Elena his arm and begins to escort her out of the church. Ethan stops her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. How could she willingly go through with this? He doesn't get it. With sad eyes, Elena tells him that this is how it must be, and it's already been done. He needs to let her go. And physically, at least, Ethan does. Bron makes a big announcement about the marriage being awesome and how they're going to depart for their honeymoon, everybody. Let this day be honored and blessed and yada yada yada. Bron thanks Ethan for making time to come to the wedding, and as they walk past, he whispers at him, "I'm going to enjoy your sister tonight." And, gross, man! Like, it's one thing for Bron to be a murdering jerk, it's another thing for him to be a creepy sexual predator, too. Ethan moves to his father, angrily demanding answers about how he could have let this happen. Dane stands firm, though. This alliance assures peace between their two countries. Is that not evident enough by what Elena just did? Bad enough that Tigress plans to invade, Ethan grumbles, but now we've got this? He thought that he had shocking news cornered on this day, but nope, apparently not. Dane suggests that this open location isn't a good place to have a discussion about an impending invasion by a third mysterious nation. If Ethan wants to talk, then they should move somewhere more secluded. As the herons step off the floor, Prince Court watches them. Ethan steps into the hallways of the church, losing himself in the shadows there. A whispered voice draws his attention, and Skink steps from the shadows. He explains that he followed Ethan here, apologizing for disobeying his orders, and that he managed to sneak in during the scene that he just made. Not everything here is as it seems, he warns. King Dane and Queen Mariella join the conversation, with the king glaring at Skink. "What is he doing here?" the king asks. Skink stares out from beneath his heavy brows. "What I've always done," he replies, looking after Ethan. Ethan turns to his mother. Does she have anything to say about this? He finds it hard to believe that she would let father make this decision, and Ethan is cut off by Kai, who says not to bother. Their father isn't who he used to be. Dane steps towards his sons. He warned him about this rebellious streak, and now Mariella does talk. She will not allow this family to fracture any further than it has. She will not let her husband and sons be enemies. If this is a day of peace and settling animosity, then they will settle this here and now. "Hell yeah, Queen!" Ethan and Dane, as their problem is the longest standing, should start healing first. Ethan agrees. Remember, he hasn't wanted any animosity with his family at all. He has only ever tried to make things right with them. He even made that special trip home. Ethan offers Dane his hand, and he waits. The king stares at the hand. Mariella prods him. "Dane?" "Of course," he says. Dane clasps hands with his son, and red energy sparks between them. Sweat beads on Dane's brow. They release the handshake, Dane trusting that these differences are behind them now. But Ethan remembers that feeling. "Father, are you feeling well?" he asks. "You seem disturbed." Dane protests. No, he's fine. But Ethan insists, spreading his arms to give his father a hug. Dane tries to step back, but Ethan grabs him by the shoulders. "What's wrong, father? Why won't you embrace your own flesh and blood?" And as Ethan comes into more solid contact, energy flashes between the two. It builds into a great burst, and Dane flies away from Ethan. We can see two ghostly energy forms shouting out from Dane's body, those of Burned Rex and Mai Shen. The Heron royal family is shocked by this sudden display. Skink just watches. After shifting forms in the shadows, Mai Shen stands up. Her fist glows with crimson energy. You mortals are more clever than she thought. But what can they really do about it now, she asks, smiling. Ethan recognizes and names her. Mai Shen, she's Bron's advisor, because his family has never actually seen her before. "Oh," Mai Shen replies, "she is so much more than that." Ethan actually managed to steal a hint of her power, but does he really think that he can kill her? That he can kill a god? Ethan manifests his energy sword and charges in. We'll see. I love the confidence. A swirling wall of energy bounces Ethan back with just a casual wave of Mai Shen's hand. Please. He has no idea what she is. Always eager to join a fight, Kai draws his own sword and rushes to join in. But this time, a flick of the wrist is all Mai Shen needs to knock him back. Mariella shouts and rushes to her eldest son, as does Skink. Kai is okay. At least, he tries to sit up. He asks about helping Ethan, who has moved to defend his family from Mai Shen. Skink replies that Ethan is alive, but maybe not for long. This fight might be beyond Ethan. And that's the first time I have seen Skink doubt Ethan's abilities. Wow. The pair's fight gets bigger and bigger. Ethan and Mai Shen are shoving each other through walls, sword swings take off the roof of the church, and Mai Shen is finally launched through the front of the building, where she crashes into a fountain. Half flying and half floating, Ethan lands calmly on the stone outside the fountain. Let's finish this. Mai Shen continues to launch energy blasts at Ethan, used to fighting other members of the First, not a sword-wielding, sigil-bearing young man. Ethan finally gets inside of her guard, though, and drives his sword through her torso. Where is my father? He demands to know. Weakened, Mai Shen says that he lives, but how can Ethan find him when Dane can't even find himself? An explosion of red energy erupts from the keep, visible from outside the city. We saw a similar blast when burned Rex died, and as we move back in, Mai Shen's body slumps on Ethan's blade. He pushes her back. As Mai Shen's body falls to the ground, it crumbles into dust. She is actually, finally, dead. Kai, Mariella, and Skink rush to Ethan. What in the world was she? Kai asks. Ethan says that he doesn't know, honestly. Something more than human, at least. Mariella then steps in, asking where the real Dane is. Ethan doesn't know that either, although he says that Mai Shen confirmed that he was alive. This whole marriage thing, the peace overtures, it was all a plot of Mai Shen's and Bron's. The Queen touches both of her sons on their shoulders, connecting them. If this invasion from Tigris is as dangerous as Ethan says it is, then they must prepare for it. They need to save Elena from her fate and find their father. Kai nods. They've had their differences, and a fair share of that is his fault, he says, but that's all in the past now. They need to be brothers again. Ethan smiles grimly. They never stopped being brothers. Nothing could ever change that. And now, they are going to put their family back together. As generally frustrated as I was with the lack of new content or story progression with issue 35, I do have to say that issues 35 and 36 pair together really well. 35 catches us up on all of the relevant characters and their opinions and perspectives on what is going on, and then 36 is the one that really moves everything forward a step. The wedding was officiated, Dane was finally revealed to be Mai Shen. Vindication! She was finally killed for realsies, and the Heron brothers have set aside their differences. That is some solid forward movement that we get at the very end of year 3, and I approve of this. That doesn't mean that the forward movement justifies the slower pace that it took to get there. I can't help but think that you could have opened issue 35 with Elena and Dane outside of the church, with Elena doing her quiet, steadying breath already. Like, honestly, that moment tells you everything that you need to know about Elena in this situation. She is reluctant to do this, but she's going to go through with it anyways. As they walk in, you get to see Kai's brief opinion with his mother, you get to see Bron's smarminess as she takes her position opposite of him, and then do the wedding. Then, as the vows are being exchanged, you could just have these sound effects outside start to come through the walls, implying Ethan's approach without actually showing anything. Then, have Ethan knock the door open, he tries to confront Bron, Elena shuts it down, and then she and Bron leave together. Defeated, Ethan would go to confront his father over all of this, and you could have ended issue 35 with the reveal that Dane is actually Mai Shen, and then issue 36 could have been a big Dragon Ball Z-style fight issue if you don't want to move the plot forward too much and screw up the pacing of all the rest of your issues. That pacing would have been much more exciting, and if I have any complaint about Mai Shen dying, it is that it happens super quickly, so giving her a whole issue to get killed in makes more sense to me. We saw the fight scene between Burned Rex and Mai Shen back in issue 19. We know that Mai Shen is a determined fighter. She is powerful enough that she was able to outpower another member of her race, the Mysterious First, and we also saw the devastation that Rex's death brought to the countryside around them. His corpse was sitting in the center of an enormous crater, implying just how powerful Mai Shen is and how much energy it took to kill him. In comparison, we have seen Ethan struggle against Bron, who is a skilled, experienced swordsman gifted with only a portion of Mai Shen's power. If Ethan has trouble with that level of combat, though, how does he overpower Mai Shen so easily here? Like, I do give Ethan some credit for fighting with a weapon, which allows him to deflect Mai Shen's energy blasts, numbing some of her attack, and then he attacks her in a way that she isn't used to. Mai Shen is used to the Zelda-style energy ball tennis, not sword-to-sword combat. But Ethan knocks her around a bit, blocks a few of her shots, and then runs her through when she's dead. And despite the huge release of energy upon her death, there was no damage done to the surrounding area. Ethan and Mai Shen were fighting in the Raven Keep's chapel. We are shown that there are innocent bystanders and surrounding structures around them, and other than Mai Shen's body, everything around them is fine. This makes her death feel very inconsistent with the death of Burned Rex. And while her death does give Ethan a victory here at the end of year 3 and closes out her threat, it doesn't feel terribly earned, you know? And of course, Mars ruins the victory for Ethan with Mai Shen's mysterious teasing about Dane's true location and situation, which is classic Mars. He has always had Ethan's victories be double-edged. I'm fine with that. But rather than feeling like the last twist of the knife from a properly defeated villain, this feels more like a handout. You've bought your way through this wildly inconsistent year 3, champ, so here's a win. Hope you stick around for year 4. I do enjoy the lead-up to the fight, though. Elena being the one who stops Ethan and Bron from fighting is great, and it kinda goes to show how perfect this marriage is in concept. We had a heron and a raven ready to kill each other in a flooping church, and Elena shut that down without a thought. The two nations might not be ready for peace yet, but Elena won't be stopped from doing her part in maintaining that peace. It really goes to show that while Mars has made Elena basically feel like a victim in this story, partially because of her role's obligations and then Mai Shen and Bron's manipulations, Elena ultimately chose to do this. She believes in this course of action, and she is going to make it work, damn it! And that is some pretty awesome character work. Elena, in Ethan's perspective, might be a princess who needs rescuing, but from Elena's perspective, Elena is a princess who is saving two nations from war. That's pretty great. Having the herons uncover Mai Shen through Ethan's actions is great. It reinforces the idea that Ethan is our central character, despite being largely absent from this half of the plotline. I love that Mars doesn't explain how Ethan knew that something was up, either. We get no long-winded explanation of, oh, you remember that time that Ethan touched Burned Rex and he absorbed some of his energy and it was weird, but no one really knew what was going on? We don't get any of that. The longtime readers, or the longtime listeners of this podcast, know that Ethan accidentally absorbed some of Burned Rex's energy back in issue 6 of the comic through physical contact. The same thing happens here with Dane when Ethan shakes his hand. He siphons off a small bit of that power. And we are shown him examining his hand like, oh, that was weird. And then in a follow-up panel, he's massaging that hand with his other one. So clearly, he knows that something happened and he is putting 2 and 2 together. That's a cool use of this comic's history, and it's also a cool use of Ethan's experiences without outright telling us what's going on. Again, we're not being treated like we're idiots for this portion of the story. We're just treated like we're idiots back in issue 35 when we needed to be told everything that was going on. So, again, this part of it nails it. 36, great. 35, less than great. I did think for sure that Prince Court was going to get in on this particular moment, meaning the Mai Shen reveal. After all, we see him watching the herons leave the main part of the church. That feels important, because here's the thing, right? As far as everyone in the world is concerned, Elena and Bron's marriage is legal. She agreed to it before both nations and her family and a priest. Even if Dane wasn't Dane, what does that matter? It's not like the Heron royal family is going to get on Raven National Broadcast and say that Bron's advisor was a god from another world, manipulating Bron and pretending to be Dane in order to secure the Heron throne using strange god powers. That literally sounds like made-up nonsense. Nobody would believe it. So I fear that Elena is still trapped, and any Heron attempts to free her will only bring on a new bout of war. But if Prince Court saw Mai Shen's involvement and decried her manipulations and aided the Heron royal family in saving their daughter and father, maybe they could also unseat Bron and put Court back on the throne. Clearly, that is not what happened here, so the moment with Court feels unnecessary, but so did Skink showing up. Him being here doesn't change anything, other than confirm that he knows more about Mai Shen than he has previously let on or told Ethan. All of that said, I'm not really sure if Year 3 built to this moment. Mars did a lot of setup for the wedding during Year 3, but Ethan's main focus, and so our main focus as the readers, has been on Tigris and finding a new way to defend the Sanctuary Isle. This wedding plotline feels more like a distraction from our main plotline than a culmination of everything that's been going on. Year 3 does explore some interesting ideas, like Ethan's divide from his family, who traditionally supported him, the underground struggle founding the Sanctuary Isle, and possibly leaving the shadow of Bron behind. But ultimately, we fell right back into Scion's old story patterns. The Heron family is allied again, the Sanctuary Isle is still undefended, and Bron is still a looming background threat. The more things change, the more they stay the same, am I right? Next time, Ethan and Kai have joined together to save their sister and their father, but Bron has proven difficult to kill time and time again. Can they find a way to free Elena, and how will they find their missing father? All while the third nation, Tigris, continues to prepare for an invasion. How long can they search for their family before it's too late? Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 18.21 of Scion, Needing Each Other. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.